Well, a very good morning, students. And today we are moving on to the fifth chapter from your text, Flamingo, the chapter titled Indigo. And this has been taken from an autobiography written by Louis Fisher on the life of Mahatma Gandhi. And just a small extract has been taken to form this short story. Now, why this extract has been taken from all the other life events of Gandhi is because this story, the events that take place, it can be termed as the first civil disobedience movement that was launched by Gandhiji in favor of the farmers in Champaran, Bihar. Now, what was the Champaran incident? Why did Gandhi have to go and intervene on behalf of the farmers? That we will learn in this chapter. So, with that, we're going to begin the text. When I first visited Gandhi in 1942 at his ashram in Sevagram in central India, he said, "I'll tell you how it happened that I decided to urge the departure of the British. It was in 1917. So our author, Louis Fisher, he met Gandhi at his ashram in Sevagram in the year 1942, and that is where he told him about the story that took place in 1917. He had gone to the December 1916 annual convention of the International Congress, now in Lucknow. There were 2,301 delegates and many visitors. During the proceedings, Gandhi recounted, "A peasant came up to me, looking like any other peasant in India, poor and emaciated, and said, 'I am Rajkumar Shukla. I am from Champaran, and I want you to come to my district.' Gandhi had never heard of the place. It was in the foothills of the towering Himalayas, near the kingdom of Nepal. Under an ancient arrangement, the Champaran peasants were sharecroppers. Rajkumar Shukla was one of them. He was illiterate, but resolute. He had come to the Congress session to complain about the injustice of the landlord system in Bihar, and somebody had probably said, 'Speak to Gandhi.' So it was at a time when Gandhi had gone to attend a session of the International Congress in 1916, and there he encountered a certain peasant named Rajkumar Shukla, wherein Rajkumar told him that we are having problems and you have to come help us in our district, Champaran. And Gandhi hadn't even heard of that place. It was a very far off place, and so Gandhi had not heard of it. Rajkumar Shukla told him that he was one of the peasants who was working as a sharecropper. Right, he was working under someone's land and he was getting paid for it. Gandhi told Shukla he had an appointment in Kanpur and was also committed to go to other parts of India. Shukla accompanied him everywhere. Then Gandhi returned to his ashram near Ahmedabad. Shukla followed him to the ashram. For weeks he never left Gandhi's side. "Fix a date," he begged. Impressed by the sharecropper's tenacity and story, Gandhi said, "I have to be in Calcutta on such and such a date. Come and meet me and take me from there." Months passed. Shukla was sitting on his haunches at the appointed spot in Calcutta when Gandhi arrived. He waited till Gandhi was free. Then the two of them boarded a train for the city of Patna in Bihar. There Shukla led him to the house of a lawyer named Rajendra Prasad, who later became president of the Congress Party of India. Rajendra Prasad was out of town, but the servants knew Shukla as a poor yeoman who pestered their master to help the indigo sharecroppers. So they let him stay on the grounds with his companion, Gandhi, whom they took to be another peasant. But Gandhi was not permitted to draw water from the well, lest some drops from his bucket pollute the entire source. How did they know that he was not an untouchable? Gandhi decided to go first to Muzaffarpur, which was en route to Champaran, to obtain more complete information about conditions than Shukla was capable of imparting. He accordingly sent a telegram to the Professor J.B. Kripalani of the Arts College in Muzaffarpur, whom he had seen at Tagore's Shantiniketan school. The train arrived at midnight, 15th April 1917. So, Gandhi was a very busy man at that time, right? He was the face of the nation. So he wasn't able to give time to Rajkumar. But then he found out that he was very resolute, although resolute in the sense you can say, Reet, Harna Manne, right? He kept on pestering Gandhi, and Gandhi said, fine, right now I'm busy. From here I have to go to Kanpur, and from there I have to visit other places as well. So let me tell you this. I have to be at Calcutta on such and such a date. So if you come there, I will go with you from there. And it had been months since that had happened. And when Gandhi went to Calcutta, he saw Rajkumar Shukla sitting there. So he finished his work at Calcutta and then he went with Rajkumar Shukla towards Patna, Bihar, wherein they went to visit Rajendra Prasad, whom we later come to know as Dr. Rajendra Prasad, the president of the Indian National Congress. So at that point of time, Rajendra Prasad was not home. So Rajendra Prasad's servant knew Rajkumar Shukla, right? He was pestering Rajendra Prasad as well. So they just let him hang around. And they thought that Gandhi was also present. So when Gandhi went to take water from the well, he wasn't allowed because they thought that Gandhi is untouchable and they might pollute the water. So now Gandhi decided to first go to Muzaffarpur first and find out more about what is this issue that has taken place in the area of Champaran. So he wrote a letter to Professor Kriplani, who was a professor at Muzaffarpur, and he went to meet Kriplani. Kriplani was waiting at the station with a large body of students. Gandhi stayed there for 2 days in the home of Professor Malkani, a teacher in a government school. It was an extraordinary thing in those days, Gandhi commented, for a government professor to harbor a man like me. In smaller localities, the Indians were afraid to show sympathy for advocates of home rule. The news of Gandhi's advent and of the nature of his mission spread quickly through Muzaffarpur and to Champaran. Sharecroppers from Champaran began arriving on foot and by conveyance to see their champion. Muzaffarpur lawyers called on Gandhi to brief him. They frequently represented peasant groups in court. They told him about their cases and reported the size of their fee. So, Gandhi went and stayed with his friend, Professor Kriplani, who arranged a place for Gandhi to stay that was at a house of Professor Malkani. And it was an extraordinary thing during those days for a government servant like Professor Malkani to give refuge to Gandhi, who was all against the British Empire. So now people in Muzaffarpur, they heard about the story that a man was there, a very powerful man who has come to Muzaffarpur to help the Champaran sharecroppers. So people came to meet him, to meet their champion. And even other lawyers who used to represent peasants in court, they came to Gandhi. They told him about the case and they also told him about their fees. They were charging money from the peasants. Gandhi chided the lawyers for collecting big fee from the sharecroppers. He said, I have come to the conclusion that we should stop going to law courts. Taking such cases to the courts does little good. Where the peasants are so crushed and fear-stricken, law courts are useless. The real relief for them is to be free from fear. So Gandhi sort of scolded the lawyers that they were charging such a big fee, and he said, there's no use going to the court with this, right? Nothing can be done against the British Empire in court. Just look at the peasants, look at the conditions. They are afraid. No matter how many times they go to court, nothing is going to come out of it. First, they have to let go of the fear, is what he said. So now we know what the case or what the issue at Champaran is. Most of the arable land in the Champaran district was divided into large estates owned by Englishmen and worked by Indian tenants. The chief commercial crop was indigo. The landlords compelled all tenants to plant 3/28 or 15% of their holdings with indigo and surrender the entire indigo harvest as rent. This was done by long-term contract. Presently, the landlords learned that Germany had developed synthetic indigo. They thereupon obtained agreements from the sharecroppers to pay them compensation for being released from the 15% arrangement. The sharecropping arrangement was irksome to the peasants and many signed willingly. Those who resisted engaged lawyers. The landlords hired thugs. Meanwhile, the information about synthetic indigo reached the illiterate peasants who had signed, and they wanted their money back. So this is what has happened at Champaran. All right, most of the farmers were working on fields owned by the British officers, and for rent they had an arrangement. 100% land पर चाहिँ 15% चाहिँ उनीहरूले इन्डिगो ग्रो गर्नु पर्थ्यो होला राइट इन्डिगो फ्रम इन्डिगो अ डाई इज प्रिपेयर्ड सो त्यो जुन चाहिँ 15% 85% ल्यान्डमा दे क्यान ग्रो वाट एभर दे वान्ट राइट द्याट इज नट द हेडेक अफ द ल्यान्ड ओनर्स बट 15% इन्डिगो रोप्नुपर्ने र त्यो इन्डिगोको हार्भेस्ट चाहिँ ब्रिटिसर्सलाई दिनुपर्ने एज रेन्ट ल्यान्डमा कल्टिभेट गरेकोमा सो द्याट वाज डन थ्रु अ लङ टर्म कन्ट्र्याक्ट बट बिस्तारै के भएछ जर्मनीमा सिन्थेटिक इन्डिगो डेभलप गरेछ सो नेचुरल इन्डिगोको डिमान्ड घट्यो बट द ब्रिटिसर्स दे ट्राई टु चिट द पेजेन्ट्स दे टोल्ड देम द्याट वी विल फ्री यु फ्रम ग्रोइङ इन्डिगो यु पे अस मनी सो कतिजनाले त इट वाज भेरी ट्रबलसम 15% इन्डिगो रोप्नुपर्ने आफ्नो खेत पनि हुनुपर्ने सो सम अफ देम वर भेरी ह्याप्पी एन्ड दे पेड जसले रेजिस्ट गर्दै थियो उनीहरूले लयर्स बोलायो ल्यान्डलर्ड्सले थग्सहरू बोलायो. Then slowly everyone understood why the Britishers wanted payment in money instead of indigo crops. They also learned about the Germans developing synthetic indigo. And that is what the Champaran case was about. At this point, Gandhi arrived in Champaran. He began by trying to get the facts. First, he visited the secretary of the British Landlords Association. The secretary told him that they could give no information to an outsider. Gandhi answered that he was no outsider. Next, Gandhi called on the British official commissioner of the Tirhat division in which the Champaran district lay. The commissioner, Gandhi reports, proceeded to bully me and advise me forthwith to leave Tirhat. Gandhi did not leave. Instead, he proceeded to Motihari, the capital of Champaran. Several lawyers accompanied him. At the railway station, a vast multitude greeted Gandhi. He went to a house and, using it as headquarters, continued his investigations. A report came in that a peasant had been maltreated in a nearby village. Gandhi decided to go and see. The next morning, he started out on the back of an elephant. He had not proceeded far when the police superintendent's messenger overtook him and ordered him to return to town. In his carriage, Gandhi complied. The messenger drove Gandhi home, where he served him with an official notice to quit Champaran immediately. Gandhi signed a receipt for the notice and wrote on it that he would disobey the order. So, Gandhi started working in favor of the peasants and he faced many obstacles. Jun official complain garnu gayo unale they tried to get rid of him. Some told him that you are an outsider, you have nothing to say, you don't have any right to say anything here. And Gandhi replied, I'm not an outsider, I'm an Indian in India. Then he went to the commissioner and the commissioner in fact bullied him to leave Tirhat immediately. But then Gandhi was resolute himself. His main objective was to go anything but to go against the British Empire, and that is what he was doing and helping peasants along the way as well. So thereafter he set up a base, right, or a government or office banaya, and he started doing his investigations there. Then he started getting notice of government bada that you are to leave immediately or else proceedings will be taken against you by law. And Gandhi signed the letter and he even wrote on the letter, I will disobey it, right, do what you want. In consequence, Gandhi received a summons to appear in court the next day. So latest date kardakeri court summons aaya that you have to be at court. A case has been filed against you. All night Gandhi remained awake. He telegraphed Rajendra Prasad to come from Bihar with influential friends. He sent instructions to the ashram. He wired a full report to the viceroy. But Gandhi was a very experienced man. As you know, he was a lawyer in South Africa before he came back to India. And so, he had everything planned out. Ule Rajendra Prasad la phone gariyo. He told him, get your team of very influential lawyers. Ule apno ashram ma instructions pathaya, and he even wrote a letter to the viceroy. Morning found the town of Motihari black with peasants. They did not know Gandhi's record in South Africa. They had merely heard that a Mahatma who wanted to help them was in trouble with the authorities. The spontaneous demonstration in thousands around the courthouse was the beginning of the liberation from fear of the British. The officials felt powerless without Gandhi's cooperation. He helped them regulate the crowd. He was polite and friendly. He was giving them concrete proof that their might, hitherto dreaded and unquestioned, could be challenged by Indians. The government was baffled. The prosecutor requested the judge to postpone the trial. Apparently, the authorities wished to consult the superiors. Gandhi protested against the delay. He read a statement pleading guilty. He was involved, he told the court, in a conflict of duties with one hand, not to set a bad example as a lawbreaker, on the other hand, to render the humanitarian and national service. For which he had come. He disregarded the order to leave, not for want of respect of lawful authority, but in obedience to the higher law of the being, the voice of conscience. He asks the penalty due. So when the court case was filed against him and Gandhi went to court the next day, there was a surprise waiting for the Britishers. Thousands of villagers who knew, or rather who had heard, that a man, a Mahatma who had come to save them, was being arrested, they came in support of Gandhi. So this showed that people were beginning to shed their fear against the British Empire. They had no idea what Gandhi's record was in South Africa. The peasants, all they knew was a man, a Mahatma had come to help us and we need to help him at his hour of need. And the Britishers were helpless. They weren't able to pacify the crowd. And Gandhi, in fact, helped them to regulate the crowd, all right, and for the proceedings to take place, which showed that till now, the mighty British Empire, whose rule was unquestioned, could indeed be challenged by a handful of peasant farmers. So it was so overwhelming that the British decided not to take the case forward. They said, we want to consult with other people, other officials, and let's hold court the next day. But Gandhi refused. He said, I am guilty. All right, I have broken the law. I don't want this case to go any further or the date to be postponed. Tell me, what is the penalty? I am saying that I am guilty. मैले गरेको छु wrong. I have broken the law. So tell me, what is my punishment? The magistrate announced that he would pronounce sentence after a 2-hour recess and asked Gandhi to furnish bail for those 120 minutes. The judge released him without bail. So the magistrate said, finally, we need 2 hours, all right? After 2 hours, we will tell you the sentence. Timro punishment ke ho, we will tell you after 2 hours. And he said, yo 2 ghanta bahiर janu lagi, you have to pay bail, a fee. And Gandhi said, I won't pay a bail. I won't pay any money. And the magistrate said, fine, you go without paying bail. You come back after 2 hours. When the court reconvened, the judge said he would not deliver the judgment for several days. Meanwhile, he allowed Gandhi to remain at liberty. So 2 hours बाद कोर्ट लाग्दाखेरि के भयो अरे तर गान्धीलाई कुनै फाइन पनि लगाएन, कुनै पनिशमेन्ट पनि दिनु सकेन अरे. उनीहरूले के भन्यो, we need several days to come to terms, all right? तिम्रो केस हेर्नु. So till then you are free भनेर उलाई के रिमान्डमा पनि लिएन, उलाई जेलमा पनि हालेन. He was free. Rajendra Prasad, Brij Kumar Babu, Maulana Mazharul Haq, and several other prominent lawyers had arrived from Bihar. They conferred with Gandhi. What would they do if he was sentenced to prison? Gandhi asked. Why? The senior lawyer replied, they had come to advise and help him. If he went to jail, there would be nobody to advise, and they would go home. So a lot of prominent lawyers came, all right? Rajendra Prasad, Brij Kishore, Maulana, other लोग सबैले आएर त्यहाँ उनलाई सोधे गान्धीलाई, what are we to do? We need a plan of action, right? And Gandhi asked them, what would you do if I am arrested tomorrow and I go to jail? And the lawyers replied, well, if you are not there, then we have just come to help you. If you are not there, we'll go back home. And then to which Gandhi replied, what about the injustice to the sharecroppers? Gandhi demanded. The lawyers withdrew to consult. Rajendra Prasad had recorded the upshot of their consultations. They thought amongst themselves that Gandhi was totally a stranger, and yet he was prepared to go to prison for the sake of the peasants. If they, on the other hand, being not only residents of the outjoining districts, but also those who claimed to have served these peasants should go home, it would be shameful desertion. They accordingly went to Gandhi and told him they were ready to follow him to jail. The battle of Champaran is already won, he exclaimed. Then he took a piece of paper and divided the group into pairs and put down order in which each pair was to quarter rest. Several days later, Gandhi received a little communication from the magistrate informing him that the lieutenant governor of the province had ordered the case to be dropped. Civil disobedience had triumphed, the first time in modern India. So when Gandhi said, "What about the sharecroppers? Doesn't matter if I go to jail, but what about the poor sharecroppers?" That is when the lawyers realized and they talked among themselves that he is an outsider. Gandhi is an outsider and yet he is willing to go to jail for the interest of the sharecroppers. And then they went to Gandhi and he said, "If you go to jail, we'll go to jail with you." To which Gandhi said, "Then the battle is already won. All right, we have already won." And he strategized a plan. He said, "Jori jori ma chutaisa, so that if anybody gets arrested, aru pani goera court arrest hunu parcha, we also surrender bhanera." But then several days later, magistrate bata एउटा letter आयो अरे. त्यो लेटरमा के लेखेको थियो अरे that जुन चाहिँ केस लागेको थियो गान्धीको अगेन्स्टमा लुटेनेन्ट गभर्नरले ड्रप गरिदियो अरे त्यो केस. त्यो केस अब हुँदैन. That doesn't hold any value. Gandhi is free by इज्जत बढी. And that, you can say, was the victory of civil disobedience in India. Gandhi and the lawyers now proceeded to conduct a far-flung inquiry into the grievances of the farmers. Deposition of about 10,000 peasants were written down, the notes made on other evidence. Documents were collected. The whole area throbbed with the activity of the investigators and the vehement protest of the landlords. In June, Gandhi was summoned to Sir Edward Gate, the lieutenant governor. Before he went, he met leading associates and again laid detailed plans for the civil disobedience if he should not return. So after that victory, they started working in earnest. Unale strategized, garyo plans haru banayo, sabai study garnu thalyo case, and suddenly one day he was called by the lieutenant governor in the month of June. Lieutenant governor's name was Sir Edward Gate, and before he went, he told his friends, "If I get arrested or I don't return, you have to do this and this." So everything was well planned. It was very organized, all right. Mob rule थिएन, चङ्दे गयो बोकेर यता कुदे उता कुदे हैन. Each and every step had a lot of thought behind it. Gandhi had 4 protracted interviews with the lieutenant governor, who as a result appointed an official commission of inquiry into the indigo sharecropper situation. The commission consisted of landlords, government officials, and Gandhi as the sole representative of the peasants. Gandhi remained in Champaran for an initial uninterrupted period of 7 months and then again several shorter visits. The visit, undertaken casually on the entreaty of an unlettered peasant in the expectation that it would last a few days, occupied almost a year of Gandhi's life. So now Lieutenant Governor सँग 4टा meeting गरिसकेपछि के decide गर्यो that Lieutenant Governor will look into the Champaran issue. उनले एउटा कमिसन बनायो अरे. त्यो कमिसनमा को थियो? ब्रिटिस गभर्नमेन्ट अफिसियल थियो, त्यहाँ ल्यान्डलर्ड्सहरू थियो, अलराइट, एन्ड पेजेन्ट्सलाई रिप्रेजेन्ट गर्ने चाहिँ गान्धी मात्रै थियो. So initially गान्धीले के सोचेको थियो, this case will not take much, but then it almost took 1 year of his life. First ऊ 7 महिनासम्म कन्टिन्युस त्यहाँ बस्यो, त्यहाँदेखि फेरि आफ्नो आश्रम जाँदै अरू काम हेर्दै he came on several shorter visits which lasted about a year. The official inquiry assembled a crushing mountain of evidence against the big planters, and when they saw this, they agreed in principle to make refunds to the peasants. But how much must we pay? They asked Gandhi. So बल्ल बल्ल सबै केसहरू कमिसनरले फाइन्ड आउट गर्दाखेरि के भयो, सबै फल्ट ल्यान्ड ओनर्सकै देख्यो, पेजेन्ट्सहरूले जित्यो. So now उनीहरूले सोधे, all right, fine, we are at fault, how much must we pay? They thought he would demand repayment in full of the money which they had illegally and deceitfully extorted from the sharecroppers. So Britishers के सोचे, जति हामीले यिनीहरूबाट लुटेको छ सबै माग्छ अब गान्धीले भने. But Gandhi didn't do that. उसले के गर्यो? He asked only 50%. There he seemed adamant. writes Reverend J.G. Hodge, a British missionary in Champaran who observed the entire episode at close range. Thinking probably that he could not give way, the representative of the planters offered to refund to the extent of 25%, and to his amazement, Mr. Gandhi took him at his word, thus breaking the deadlock. So 50% ma fix bas here, but then there was a Reverend J.G. Hodge, a British missionary जो चम्पारणमा थियो उसले देखेको थियो अरे आई विटनेस टु द इन्सिडेन्ट एन्ड ल्यान्डलर्डहरूले के सोचे अब यो मान्छे 50% भन्दा मान्दैन कम्ती बट स्टिल दे जस्ट ट्राइड what about 25%? We'll pay you 25%. And Gandhi readily agreed. He said, fine, 25%, done deal. Let's sign the agreement. And thus the Champaran issue was solved. But the question arises now. Gandhi 100% पनि माग्नु सक्थ्यो उसले तर 50% माग्यो त्यो 50% मा ऊ फिक्स बसेन ऊ 25% मा मान्यो why was it? It was more than money, which we'll come to know now. This settlement was adopted unanimously by the commission. Gandhi explained that the amount of the refund was less important than the fact that the landlords had been obliged to surrender part of the money, and with it, part of the prestige. Therefore, as far as the peasants were concerned, the planters had behaved as lords above law. Now the peasants knew that they had rights and defenders. He learned courage. So Gandhi lekhe that money is not important. What is important is that उनीहरूले जुन चाहिँ 25% दियो त्यो सँगसँगै उनीहरूको प्राइड उनीहरूको इगो उनीहरूको जुन चाहिँ मनमा थियो that Britishers cannot be questioned, they are above the law, they rule over Indians, त्यो थिङ्किङ उनीहरूको wrongful thinking जुन चाहिँ थियो त्यो चाहिँ सक्यो. Now the ego is crushed, their pride is crushed. उनीहरूले peasantsहरूसँग हार मानेर पैसा दिनु पर्यो. That was the objective. Alright? Money was never the issue. Events justified Gandhi's position. Within a few years, the British planters abandoned their estates, which reverted to the peasants. Indigo sharecropping disappeared. And he was right. Gandhi was right. उनीहरूको इगोमा इफेक्ट भयो, उनीहरूको प्राइडमा इफेक्ट भयो. Within a few years, उनीहरूले ल्यान्डहरू सबै छोडेर गयो, which meant that the land came back to the peasants. Gandhi never contented himself with large political or economic solutions. He saw the cultural and social backwardness in the Champaran villages and wanted to do something about it immediately. He applied for teachers, Mahadev Desai and Netri Parekh, two young men who had joined Gandhi as disciples, and their wives volunteered for the work. Several more came from Bombay, Pune and other distant parts of the land. Devadas, Gandhi's youngest son, arrived from the ashram, and so did Mrs. Gandhi. Primary schools were opened in 6 villages. Kasturbai taught them the ashram rules on personal cleanliness and community sanitation. Health conditions were miserable. Gandhi got a doctor to volunteer his services for 6 months. 3 doctors were available: castor oil, quinine and sulfur ointment. Anyone who showed a coated tongue was given a dose of castor oil. Anybody with malaria fever received quinine plus castor oil. Anybody with skin eruption received ointment plus castor oil. Gandhi noticed the filthy state of women's clothes. He asked Kasturbai to talk to them. One woman took Kasturbai into the hut and said, "Look, there is no box or cupboard here for clothes. The sari I am wearing is the only one I have." During his long stay in Champaran, Gandhi kept a long distance watch on the ashram. He sent regular instructions by mail and asked for financial accounts. Once he wrote to the residents that it was time to fill in the old latrine trenches and dig new ones, otherwise the old ones would begin to smell bad. So not only did Gandhi just solve the problem of the Champaran peasants, he also did a lot for the community. उसले उनीहरूको कन्डिसन देखेर के गर्यो, उनीहरूको गान्धीको disciples, which were in millions, उनीहरूको हेल्प लियो. टिचर्सहरू बोलायो, गान्धीको आफ्नो सन पनि आयो, his wife came there, स्कुल्सहरू सेटअप गर्यो. He taught people about cleanliness and sanitization of community, sapha basnu, hygiene basnu vanera. And Gandhi noticed one thing, that the women were very dirty, all right, and he asked his wife Kasturbai to talk about it. कुरा गर्दाखेरि कस्तुरबाईलाई एउटा वुमनले हटमा लगेर के भन्यो, "Do you see any box मेरो यो हटमा? केही छैन लुगाको दरस. जुन चाहिँ मैले साडी लगाएको छु, that is the only one that I have." So he started uplifting the community of Champaran, all right? And त्यही बसेर उले आफ्नो आश्रम पनि डाइरेक्सन्सहरू दिँदै चलाउँदै थियो. Plus he got help in the form of doctors, कहाँ कहाँ डिफ्रेन्ट स्टेट्सहरूबाट डक्टर्सहरू आएर बिमारीहरूलाई याद गर्नु थाले चम्पारणमा. The Champaran episode was a turning point in Gandhi's life. What I did, he explained, was a very ordinary thing. I declared that the British could not order me about in my own country. So Gandhi के भन्छ चम्पारणमा मैले जे गरेँ, there's not a big thing. I didn't do a miracle. All I told the Britishers was that you cannot order me about in my own country. But Champaran did not begin as an act of defiance. It grew out as an attempt to alleviate the distress of a large number of poor peasants. This was the typical Gandhi pattern. His politics were intertwined with the practical day-to-day problems of the millions. His was not a loyalty to abstractions. It was a loyalty to living, human beings. In everything Gandhi did, moreover, he tried to mold a new free Indian who could stand on his own 2 feet and thus make India free. Early in the Champaran action, Charles Freer Andrews, the English pacifist who had become a devoted follower of the Mahatma, came to bid Gandhi farewell before going on a tour to the Fiji Islands, tour of duty to the Fiji Islands. Gandhi's lawyer friends thought it would be a good idea for Andrews to stay in Champaran and help them. Andrews was willing if Gandhi agreed, but Gandhi was vehemently opposed. He said, "You think that in this unequal fight it would be helpful if you have an Englishman on our side. This shows the weakness of your heart. The cause is just, and you must rely upon yourself to win the battle. You should not seek a prop in Mr. Andrews because he happens to be an English man." So, इनिसियली जब चम्पारणमा भर्खर उनीहरूले फाइट गर्नु थाल्दै थियो त्यति बेला गान्धीको एउटा फलोवर थियो, एउटा इङ्ग्लिसम्यान मिस्टर एन्ड्रुज. उसले गान्धीलाई गुड बाई विस गर्नु आएको थियो बिकज इज गोइङ अन टुर अफ ड्युटी टु फिजी आइल्यान्ड्स. त्यति बेला अरू लयर्सहरूले के भनेको थियो, वाइ डोन्ट यु स्टे ब्याक मिस्टर एन्ड्रुज, वाइ डोन्ट यु हेल्प अस? एन्ड एन्ड्रुज अग्रिड. ही सेड आई विल हेल्प यु इफ गान्धीजी अग्रिज. एन्ड गान्धी इन फ्याक्ट was complete. Gandhi's reaction was complete opposite. He told the lawyers, "What do you think? You think that in this unequal fight against the British, you think that having Mr. Andrews, a Britisher, on our side will help you in this case. You should not be doing that, all right? Just because एउटा Englishman हो उनीहरूलाई साइडमा लिएर तिमीले जित्छौ भनेर होइन. हाम्रो कज राइट हो. We are fighting a fair game. So we do not need anyone's help. हामीले आफै गर्नुपर्छ भनेर. Mr. Andrew, he had read our minds correctly, Rajendra Prasad comments, and we had no reply. Gandhi, in his way, taught us a lesson in self-reliance. Self-reliance, Indian independence, and help to sharecroppers were all bound together. And Rajendra Prasadले पनि अग्री गरेको छ यो कुरा that yes, he had read our minds. हामीले चाहिँ Mr. Andrewsलाई त्यसरी नै युज गर्नु आँटेको थियो. But then Gandhi, he taught us to rely on ourselves and not on anybody else. So with this, we come to the end of the 5th chapter. Please go through the text yourself as well. Don't just listen to the audio or look at the video, right? Text ma afai pani parnu, you will understand the chapter much better, underline the difficult words, and find the meaning as well. So until the next class, take care and goodbye.